Hi, everybody, and welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know the pit, and chiefly we know that we love the pit as it has officially wrapped up a 15-hour shift that's felt like forever, assumingly to the staff of the Pittsburgh Trauma Medical Center, let alone to us, has reached its conclusion. The doctors and nurses have walked off into the very, early set sun, cracked open a couple of cold ones and cheers to their success, as we should with this show as well. Incredibly popular, heralded so far as one of the best shows of 2025. And I've been joined by a motley crew, much like Dr. Robbie and company, to break down whether we love it just as much as everyone else seems to. And they're two people who have talked quite a few times on this very network about the pit, courtesy of their show, The Tastemakers. First, let me welcome in Taran Armstrong. Taran, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm just so happy the show exists. I was a big ER fan back in the day. So when the pit was announced, it caught my eye. And honestly, it exceeded my wildest expectations, and I'm excited to talk about it.
And of course, Grace Leader here too. Grace, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing much better than basically every patient who goes into the pit. And at some point, I was going to say, I don't know if I think I'm definitely doing better than most of the doctors as well, just emotionally as well. So,
Yeah,
you
with
have
the
that.
exception of maybe Whitaker, who's like ending this
Yeah,
stuff on the sunnier side up. He's got a house now, or at least a room to put his stuff down in where he can sing like nobody's watching.
yeah. I'm excited to talk about it. I loved the season. I was not an ER person. I actually haven't, other than basically House. I've not really done the medical drama. And now I'm like, I'm wondering if I should do it, but if I've also like the bar is too too,
Yeah.
too high after watching the pit. So excited to chat about it today.
No, I mean, if we talk about sort of our resumes, if you will, our prior conditions, maybe when it comes to our surveys of
What is it? Pre-existing conditions? Yeah.
pre-existing
Right.
conditions,
Yeah.
exactly. Don't deny any coverage here. We are
Yeah.
covering the show in full today. I am sort of in the Grace camp in that I'm someone who has expressed before, like I'm not huge into the body horror graphic type of stuff, and so I've checked out stuff like ER, as a child of the 90s, maybe like a smidge of Grey's Anatomy, though that seemed, with no offense, a little too melodramatic, as of course an episode of the late podcast TV for real showed. I knew very little about Grey's Anatomy, but to be completely cards up about myself, so I am the TV editor for Parade magazine, and we had wanted to do some sort of coverage of the pit, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be talking with Noah Wiley at some point. So let me check out. I had like the first 5 episodes of screeners. Let me just take a gander as to what this is. And I fell in love. I fell into the pit, to quote another well acclaimed series. It's just, for me, yes, there were still graphically gruesomely realistic storylines and moments. I definitely had to look away during one particular moment where they had to basically puncture a guy's eye to let out all the pressure from the blood that was accumulating, that poor baseball kid. So there were definitely moments when I still felt a little sick to my stomach, but at the same time, both the structure and the pace and just the characterization of everything I thought was so incredibly refreshing, Taryn. I mean, we'll talk about this. There's been a lot that's come out after the fact about this season. We're talking a few days after the season one finale. One of them being that the show grew in viewership week to week. I think hitting its peak at around a little over 10 million people. And I think it's speaking to, especially in a day and age where the binge format has kind of become king amongst these streamers. This is Max specific. It's not HBO and Max. It's only on Max. The creators' insistence to stick with a weekly format, I think the massive success of this show is due at least part to the fact that they decided to go with this formula and it accumulated so much word of mouth over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a huge part of the conversation around the show has been that it feels like old school TV. Like ER back in the day was sort of one of the first big branches into a higher level of prestige for television. Like George Clooney gets his start on ER, he becomes a movie star. And it was seen as like really high quality drama on network television. Not that that hadn't been done before, but I think it was like sort of the next step toward the era of prestige television that we eventually got with like premium cable and stuff. And then it lasted a long time, and its reputation started to falter. I think it's remembered better now because you can easily watch the first 8 seasons of it and have a great time, and I think that you can sort of like get through the next few seasons. And then it ends well. It has a good ending as well. So like, I think that it's very interesting that we are seeing now that we are so deeply entrenched in a new sort of way of creating and watching television, which is like, yes, streaming, binge, and even when it's not that, it's shorter seasons. It's 6, 8, maybe 10, maybe 12. We're not even usually getting to 13 anymore nowadays. And so for the Pitt to have 15 episodes on a weekly airing schedule, and also just be in the sort of like have the vibe of like an older school show to the down to the credit song.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't have like an upbeat intro music, but it really does feel like that mixed with some of the better things about new era television. The fact that they're able to show more things, the fact that they're able to use whatever language they're going to use, they have a bit more freedom to explore a bunch of different concepts, and they have a bit more freedom to experiment with the structure of their show here. Obviously 24
Mhm.
had a sort of similar like hour by hour thing, but it still kind of followed a lot of similar structures that a lot of TV did at the time. The Pitt is happy to completely just leave you on any given moment, and it's not afraid to do that. And I think that comes with this new era of television. And so I think it really is connecting with people. I think it's also obviously a huge part of this is the medical aspect, and how there's just a lot going on in that area between the pandemic and now the different cuts to the various forms of healthcare around the country, and all of this stuff. I think it's just hitting exactly the right vein in exactly the right way, and viewership went up over the course of the season. I think the quality of the show continued to go up over the course of the season. And so, yeah, just phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Grace Taran brought up very salient points about how somehow this show feels both timely and timeless in that it takes a format that and a genre of show that, as we've talked about with various shows we mentioned, even in our histories with medical dramas, has been kind of tried and true, but brings it into a time where the medical community faces more scrutiny than ever, and the emergencies that bring people in span so many different types of things just based on the culture we live in. And so I'm also really intrigued to see like how the Pit as a show is going to hold up like 5 years from now as to certain events, certain storylines, whether they'll become less or more prescient.
Yeah, the one thing I keep like going back to is like there's the Pittsburgh is known for this at least in my experience, one of the things I classify as like a Pittsburgh landmark is Roberto Clemente Bridge, and it's there in the background if you're watching any Pirates games or anything. But I do think this is sort of a show that is a bridge between sort of that old school era and this new sort of a new era of streaming and binging. And I think Taryn talked about a lot of sentient points there. I think also this show has such a pace to it, and I think it's a very interesting show to sort of have like been like caught on as a zeitgeisty show. There's still people who I think like in my there are people who I think are a little bit um I mean, I think we're past the like golden age of prestige TV, but Taryn, you
Right.
and I talk about the tastemakers, and we a few weeks ago I put up this point of like, have there ever been this many like quality shows on TV at the exact same time? And I didn't mean a lot of people misconstrued my point, but I didn't mean like in 1 year you get Mad Men and The Sopranos and whatever, Breaking Bad, whatever. I meant like literally in 1 week of television, and specifically actually Thursday nights became quite the hotbed for TV, where Severance would release in our community, like The Traitors would air on
Mhm.
Thursdays. I'm sure I'm missing something else. Then The Pit was also on, and you have these different people who are like, this is what I'm going to first. And I feel like actually, like it was a little bit surprising to hear The Pit kind of be like oh, this is the one I actually go and watch first. I think even Taran, you were like, that's the one I'm most excited about when it comes out. And I had a friend who is more into the prestige stuff, and I was like, no, The Pitt is like, I think maybe the best show on TV right now. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna start watching it. And I do feel like the propulsion of it and how much there is in it is sort of feeding this thing that I feel like mystery shows have done, but this isn't a mystery show. But what it does is every episode, you never know what is going to come through the door and what the show is going to explore. I think that it's maybe, if this does not win some sort of best ensemble cast at some point award, I think that's like egregious. I never try to use Rob, but they will be robbed because it's so good. Basically, anybody who comes in and then like that doctor gets assigned to that case, you're like, oh, this is so fun. Like every bit of ingredient is good. So
yeah, I
it's
mean,
just hitting on all these different things.
Even as we'll get into with the mass casualty event at Pitfest, like they bring in the night staff.
Yeah.
And I left that season being like, can I just see a spinoff about the night
right.
shift? Because like the night shift doctors are so interesting. And that choice to just like kind of bring in this other entire group of characters for the latter 4 episodes and having them mix and mingle as well, where like Dr. Ellis now has a storyline with Santos of like, I mean, we obviously, and we are far from the ones that have the expertise to be like, oh, how accurate is this show? But I think it's also accurate in like the actual timeline of things of letting people kind of come in and leave. I know that, I got the chance to speak with Scott Gemmell a couple of times over the course of the season. And one of the things that he literally showed me during an interview was that he has a giant map of the pit with all the rooms mapped out. And he has all these sticky notes of patients. And so as they're breaking out the story, he's moving people around, trying to be like, okay, we got to make sure to remember that this person's in this, and this is what they have, and this is the timeline of when they're going to be moved up. It just seems like, in talking with a lot of the actors as well, even filming this show is unlike anything any of them had ever done before, no matter what their expertise level, specifically the point that this was shot in sequence. I'll often reference an interview in this podcast that I did with Taylor Dearden, who plays Dr. Mel, I would argue the breakout star of this show. And she said that speech that Robbie gives to everybody at the end of the day was actually the last scene they filmed in the season. And I wonder if, obviously, from a practicality perspective, it makes sense, but it also probably helps from an acting perspective as well. And that you don't need to remember, where am I at this point? Who am I working with? Like, you just have to kind of stay in the moment, much like the doctors do.
It's funny. I was listening to an interview with Noah Wiley, and while yes, I think everything in the hospital itself was shot in sequence, all of the exteriors were shot before, and so they shot Dr. Robbie talking to Dr. Abbott on the roof in the morning, and then that same night they filmed the nighttime rooftop scene, and when he was saying "good speech," they hadn't written the speech yet. So that I thought that was very funny, but yes, I mean, aside from that, you feel like you are feeling sort of like the degradation of the psyche of these doctors over the course of the day. Even before the Pitfest stuff happens, it would have been, I think, a particularly hard day for them. And then when that happens, it just gets even harder. And there's like little things that they do, of course, that add to that, like, their hair is getting messier and messier over the course of the day, and they're careful about like different wardrobe choices, and of course Noah is just doing such an incredible job of showing the breaking of Dr. Robbie, culminating in that sort of like panic attack kind of breakdown that he feels so much shame for, and it just all works. And there was so much of me that was worried over the course of the season. When I was 5-6 episodes in, I was just like, this is such a phenomenal show, and I'm really enjoying every single episode. There's 10 more of them. Like, that's simultaneously exciting and scary, because I don't want it to get bad. And I knew that probably they were going to do something big and dramatic eventually. And when Pitfest happens, I was scared. I was like, Are they gonna finally delve into like melodrama? Is it gonna be the kid that got away that happened to then go shoot up the Pitfest, and that just, does that feel right to me? Does that feel real to me? And somehow over time, even with what's happening with Langdon and all of the other like drama that's happening, it still felt real. It still felt like it was happening in real time. And like I said, I think it just only ever got stronger in its writing. And that's such an incredible feat.
Yeah, I think that the just I also think it came at sort of a perfect time, which is I think that the show comes out 1-2 years sooner. And I did the place where I got nervous, Taran, is the first time you see the COVID, sort of like Dr. Robbie have this like
Right.
flashback of what happened during COVID. And I am not a healthcare provider. I
But you
do
play one on TV.
I do play one on TV. No, my job, not when I'm not podcasting and writing, is I work for a health charity nonprofit, and I specifically do education and engagement for healthcare providers. And so, and then my sister-in-law is a nurse, my aunt was a nurse, and my sister-in-law's sister is a nurse as well. And there is something about the post COVID, like COVID happened, and there was this feeling of, I don't know if this was everywhere, but the hearts in the window and the, going
Banging the
outside and
pots and pans when
banging
people get out of the hospital. Yeah, yeah.
and there was this like acknowledgement that like they were on the front line. And I really, I think you could like feel that so intently in the show, that not just in COVID, but any day working in a hospital, like just the level of like jargon and things that are happening and the way that they're speaking. And I'm like, these people are so much smarter. Every time I think I'm smart, I should just throw on the Pit to just check myself. Like, those are the smartest people. And they choose to do this, even though it is, as we see mostly with Dr. Robbie over the course of the show, that it is an incredibly hard and challenging job. And there's this thing that I think has happened post COVID of this, and I think that the show just balances itself. It's such a deft touch with what it's trying to say, because it doesn't try to just moralize and whatever, but you do have the storyline, like the storyline where the kid comes in and has measles, and the sort of resistance, and doctor, like, they're trying to get this point across of like, no, like, you're just putting your kid in danger if you're not going to do this. And I just think that like it comes at a time where there's sort of been this like, there was everything that happened during COVID, and then there was sort of this like backlash to COVID and lockdowns and restrictions and vaccines and all of this stuff. And I just feel like the show does such a good, I don't know, it's just, I think that its viewpoint is so clear, but it doesn't feel like it's like, I don't know, it just feels like it's such a deft touch is what I keep going back to, Mike.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily like, okay, this is an issue of the week type of episode. And in speaking with R. Scott Gemmell and especially John Wells as well, who obviously had his hand in ER and obviously is an EP on this show. They made a point to be like, especially when it came to the Dr. Collins abortion storyline, to be
Right.
like, we are not making a statement about like where we're pro-choice necessarily. We just want to portray the situation as it would be realistically. And I, for a while after I watched the last two episodes, I was kind of chewing on like, how do I feel, especially after Pitfest? It is sort of like, where do you go from there? And then to have
Mhm.
the measles kid kind of be the primary storyline for those last couple of episodes. I was trying to figure out as to like, okay, why did they choose this? And it didn't really get unlocked with me until after I talked with Taylor Dearden, where she says that Pitfest, it's odd to say that it was a gray area, but it certainly was this larger conversation, right? About like mental health and how, the untreated, or whether it be, young male anger, as was talked about with Dr. McKay earlier in the season, can like manifest in horrific events like this. It's a much more gray area to talk about from a political and moral standpoint. This is much more black and white. It is like, hey, if you don't get your kid vaccinated, this could happen. Hey, if you don't get a spinal tap, he could die. And so I think it was actually a really nice way to contrast kind of sort of the coming down moment, and also serve as like a nice final point of frustration for these characters of like, they have just been through the literal ringer. Half of them are probably woozy from giving blood while also saving hundreds of lives. And now this person comes in where they could have made a very easy decision and they chose not to. And it's just like, this is how I have to end my day. it doesn't feel anticlimactic to me. It feels so appropriate to not only the fact that some days don't necessarily end on a high note, on top of, as we mentioned before, any and all cases that can come into this ER.
Well, yeah, and I think it also is sort of a good echo of what happened with COVID, where like they were on the front lines of dealing with this this mass shooting, to not only dealing with the injured and helping them and trying to save as many people as possible, but even putting their own lives at risk, hearing that the shooter might come to the hospital, and so on and so forth. And they are doing this, and you're watching them, and it feels so heroic in not a dramatized way. And then they're now coming down from that and facing distrust, suspicion, hostility from people, and they're just trying to save their kid.
Yeah.
And again, like that's I'm sure what happens a lot in general, but very much I think what happened with COVID, where it's like we're trying to help, and you're screaming at us. And so I think it only could have been that after such heroism from them, and I think that choosing to end the story on this sort of come down was such a great choice. I think that like during Pitfest, again, I was worried about it heading into it, but then during it, I was so enthralled by it. I was like Dr. Mohan, like let's go. I was almost sad that it ended, and just like I wanted more. And you sort of like have to deal with the fact that like no, it's we got to stop at some point. We have to rest, and so seeing them, deal with it in different ways, Dr. King, being like, I got a fast metabolism, don't worry about me. But then we're seeing that she's very tired and now doing her caregiving role with her sister, and Dr. Mohan having that adrenaline high and feeling like, no, we're doing this, and then crashing and breaking.
No, Crash is Dr. Javadi, I believe is her nickname.
Dr. Javadi being like, I don't know if I want to do this, is great. And really, like Santos kind of thriving almost the most, but you can see her again, like some nuances in her performance. Like she's like having this very meaningful conversation with somebody that she can relate to because he attempted suicide, and she's yawning in the conversation, not because she's disinterested, but because she's freaking tired. And then the whole episode, I was just so still like stressed that like Robbie was just going to break again, especially after his argument with Langdon. And so getting to see them unwind and then have that conversation on the roof, have the conversation out, across the street, having the beer, it was just so necessary, I think, and just the perfect way to end the season.
Yeah, the all the stuff in the last episode I thought is so good in the way in which I think it's particularly Dr. Mohan, but there's also Robbie and Dr. Abbott's talk on the where he's like, no, but I stopped. He's like, what, for like 30 seconds, like a minute, 10 minutes, even, like who cares,
Yeah.
And this idea that and I actually think it's very I like the ending in that there is even as there's like the measles case, which feels like kind of bigger and more central, there's also this pelvic case of the guy who gets run into by the truck that's happening as they come in, even though the ER, they're like not taking trauma patients, but this way in which like it just keeps going. It just keeps happening. And you have to actually at some point tell yourself like, no, like I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna go and drink a beer in the park, and I'm gonna walk home, because there is a way in which like the relentless nature of working in ER, but also in healthcare in general. Like this is a little bit of like what I feel like what I do in my work is I do healthcare education, and so I'm trying to make sure that healthcare providers know the latest information. And there's these like things that they're battling against, which is one is like, I'm trying to teach them like do education on top of the work that they're already doing, and finding space of like having them to go above and beyond and be like, yeah, but I need you, like, we need to make sure that the patients are getting the best care. But it's like they're being stretched so thin in healthcare. That's specifically happening. Like, obviously I live in Canada, so we have a different healthcare system, but currently in Ontario, what's happening is a very similar thing to what I think has been happening in America for a long time, which is sort of an erosion of the public healthcare to hopefully be able to, for people to be able to privatize it and take advantage and make money off of healthcare, which I think is despicable. But there, and what's happening at the moment is that the current health, they're letting the current healthcare system be as stretched as possible. And you end up with these healthcare providers who are working long days. If they need to take a day off, there's nobody to sub in or, whatever. And it's just, it is a relentless job that just like, one of my favorite moments from the show actually in the last episode is a moment where they're all sitting down having a beer and an ambulance goes by and they all just kind of like look in turn of this, like, it's almost like you would imagine, like, they all could run in and go back and do it, but like their job right now to be able to do the thing in the morning is to stop and to like to take a break, because it is so much, and it's so much on them. And I feel like the Robbie stuff I think is so important. Obviously, it's incredibly important from a healthcare perspective, and him as a doctor, and to be able to show that. I know a lot of people were, in terms of Dr. King, are talking about the way in which like she is never scolded for being more emotional or more tuned into that, of like not putting on that, but there's actually like a way in which like it is an extreme advantage for her to have. I think it's important not just from this role, and it's a thing I admire about healthcare providers, but it's like an important lesson for people to take back no matter sort of like what job you're in.
That's the thing for me that, again, is so interesting, the way that Robbie sort of like internalizes his own breakdown, both in denial, but with one exception, which is like when he sees Mel emotional and he says, like, don't ever
Yeah.
say sorry for being, for getting emotionally involved with a patient. I think it's this idea that, like, to help people, you need to acknowledge that you are a person yourself. That like you can understand, it's a sense of empathy. And while that might cut both ways, and we certainly have seen someone like Whitaker, right, like get in his feels too much about the first person that he ever lost, you don't want to necessarily get yourself too involved in it. But in order to have a good bedside manner that helps your patient reviews, you need to be able to put yourself in their shoes, understand where they're coming from, and make a key relationship that will come and go every 6 seconds or so. And so I think it is a really key lesson of like the simultaneous severance of humanity you sometimes have to have with like making sure your soul does not sink with all of the death and destruction that could be coming your way, while also simultaneously like needing that humanity. Dr. King sort of having this superpower of like being able to connect with people, primarily kids, that others can't. That goes to show that that's the thing that doctors are best at sometimes, Taran.
Yeah, and I think it's a very common phrase, like doctors are the worst patients, and I think that like Robbie is so clearly an example of that, where throughout the season he is frustrated at various patients who are refusing treatment in different ways or refusing the advice in different ways, and yet throughout the season he is told from so many different people, like, dude, chill, maybe you should take the day, maybe you need some help. And then at the end of the season, when Abbott is like, has this great line about, it's like, my therapist says I take comfort in the darkness. And we learn that, like, Dr. Robbie does not see a therapist, and, probably should. And so, like, his inability to take the advice of the people that care about him and the people that know what he probably should be doing, I think, is probably something that a lot of people can relate to, probably a lot of people in healthcare as well. And so I think that that definitely plays into all of it.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Go
Chris.
ahead, Mike. Well, I was going to say the one thing I also really appreciate about the show is the way in which I know that there was some like the episode happens where Langdon gets sent home, and everyone's kind of like, there's too much time left. Like, we're definitely going to see Langdon again. A lot of speculation that he would come back as a patient, right? He'd like could be have overdose or something, come back
OD.
in. And then this other thing that everyone kind of picked up on, which is, well, it's a 12-hour shift, but there's 15 episodes. Everyone's like, what is like how like what's going to happen? And there was a lot of that sort of theorizing. And we did get Langdon. He comes back when the shooting happens, and he does, and we do get some bit of, there is some finality to some closure of that So while also leaving the door open, sorry, for whatever a season 2 looks like. Like you can sort of see where like Langdon and Dr. Robbie do not end on great terms. And in fact, it's probably the most mad I've been in the show is when Langdon is basically telling Robbie, he's saying all the things that Robbie is worried that people think about him, right?
Yep.
Of like you broke down, you couldn't do, like you're calling me for like whatever, but you're the one
Like,
who's
yeah,
like
you're
failing.
you're calling me weak for the vices I take when like you had to have a breakdown in peds during a mass casualty event. All the worst things that Langdon could say in that moment.
But the other thing I think like that to me feel that that feels like it sort of closes the storyline of the season. He tells him all the things like he's gonna have to do, go to rehab, blah 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 blah. But also it leaves the door open for something else. I also kind of, and I think it's a credit to how good this show is, that there are a bunch of stuff that we really don't get closure on. So Dr. Collins being
Yes,
sent home.
I wanted to talk about that because yeah, that was obviously a big one that is something that does not get closure because you kind of look at this is where the writing versus the timeline kind of doesn't necessarily vibe with each other, right? Because you're like in any other show, Collins would have an
Yeah.
opportunity to come back and wrap back up on that miscarriage. But if you think about it, she only went home like 3 hours ago.
And she was told, like, go home, turn off your phone, have a bath, do it. And it's just unfortunate that there ends up being like, and that to me, that to me, like, this is a show that's like, when it comes back, I'm sure we are going to touch on, there's going to be, Collins is going to have her own trauma and reaction to the fact that she was not there the day that, like, she left early, the day that there was a mass shooting, a mass casualty. So, like, that to me, like, I think I credit the writing. There's so much happening that I think they can leave things like there's other shows where if this was the only storyline, if this was the main thing we were focused on the whole time, I'm a little Taran like, you didn't wrap it up. But I actually think the show balanced things really well in that regard.
Yeah, I loved it. On any other show, in order for a main character to be gone for the last like 5 episodes of the season, they would have had to have either died or like, you know, gone on vacation to Europe or something. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Right.
Like,
Right.
oh, the actor's leaving, so we have to send them away for a while.
And even then they would
Like
call or
George
something,
Clooney.
Yeah, but
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and so yeah, it's that level of just like being sent home means you're not on the show anymore, and that's correct. That's what it should be because the show is this shift, yeah, there are so many different things I think that they did. To really hammer home. I think this all speaks to the sense of reality that we've talked about a little bit already. That like it never devolves into melodrama. It never feels like it's cheating. There it's still fiction. It's still a scripted show. There are going to be things that aren't 100% there, but it is so close that you are not really like looking for the seams or even really able to see the seams many of the time. And I think that like they set these things up really brilliantly, especially with Langdon, where I love the arc with Langdon and Santos. Um,
Mm.
how we are introduced to Santos and she is so frustrating because she's like nicknaming people and they're like, can you please not do that? And she won't listen to them. And she seems to be making these brash decisions that could like end in disaster. And she has an issue with Langdon. And Langdon, in the meantime, is not perfect, but has these really nice moments with everyone's favorite or should be favorite Mel, and she loves him, and that makes us want to love him. And the different like biases that go into it as well as like he is your classic George Clooney handsome
Yeah.
doctor, and you don't when she first brings it up, you're like, nah, come on. You don't want her to be right, especially because she's a frustrating character. And for them to kind of like flip that by the end of the season, and he is at his lowest and most frustrating, and she has sort of found more of a rhythm for herself, and she's connecting to patients, and she's offering support to her fellow like interns. Like, I just thought that was so well done and crafted, and just speaks to, I think, a level of character writing on this show that really makes it sing. Because for as much as we talk about all of the other angles, I think the thing that really, really is the secret ingredient to all of it is just how well crafted the characters are. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is like a monument of, sort of like, oh, I can do everything. Mel is probably the closest person to having no flaws. But like, I love that, I have so much respect for Dr. Robbie. And also, there are times when I'm like, dude, no, you're wrong on this
Yeah,
one.
dude, don't take the measles dad into the morgue. I know it's very frustrating, but like when everyone else is like, dude, what the hell? Yeah, so that Langdon storyline, it took me a while, and I'm still kind of chewing over it because the Langdon side of it, I actually really appreciated what they did. And I got the chance to talk with Patrick Ball about this, about the fact that, we'll talk about this a bit with Whitaker as well. I often say the best twists in shows and movies are the ones where they're surprising in the moment, but then when you look back, you can kind of like see the steps that led up to it. And the fact that like Lang's a little like too on the ball, right? When we first see him. The fact
On
that
the Patrick Ball.
the Patrick Ball, exactly. The fact that I think it's Dana calls him an adrenaline junkie, and he has a very adverse reaction to that. Like, it's clear that now that you understand that he is somebody who was abusing, prescription meds and painkillers to the point that he was essentially stealing them from patients, it does make a lot of sense. And so it didn't feel like as out of nowhere to me. And it also felt realistic to the fact that, you know, addicts can be anywhere. They can take any form. You could have one of the most like high function, button up, well put together people in your lives, and they could be a frequent abuser of some of the worst things behind the scenes. It is not always going to be like we saw with the Kraken, the unhoused person begging for drugs on the street, bloodshot eyes. Sometimes it is the people you suspect the least. The Santos side of things, I'm kind of on and off on in that, like, I like how, to your point, Taran, it does serve as a nice point in their relationship where, like, clearly of all the people that would notice something's off, it would be her, who has kind of like not necessarily been welcomed in by the shiny luster that is Dr. Langdon. This is maybe where the timeline does kind of jut up for me, where it's like, I know she's a very forward person. I don't know if on your first day she would be the one to be like, "Yep, and this is the evidence that I have." I think that a lot of people made a lot of comparisons to Noah Wiley, actually, of all people, experiencing a very similar storyline in his character on ER. And that's something that has the grace of being able to get developed over weeks, if not years of, in hospital time, as opposed to, I think, the timeline of the Pit, when you want this moment to happen, it does kind of come at maybe hand waving a bit of like, yeah, and Santos decides within 6 hours that this guy might be abusing prescription drugs. Grayson decides to, report him.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think it's where you like, I don't even want to call them seams. Like they're not really seams, but it's definitely a thing you like. No, I would agree with you that it feels like maybe a little fast. I think that they basically do enough. Like there's this moment where that I really like where Santos admits to a mistake that's not her mistake that she's made.
Yes.
That like
it was the dipping the guy who was
Right.
like overdosing on ecstasy into the ice bath, I think.
And I do think there's a degree of like character development probably happens too quickly for a character who is the work. It's like the ninth hour of a 12-hour shift or whatever. But I do think the one thing I give this show credit for is in the ways in which, yes, we all know that probably this is not the exact like it's very rare that people would have had a day that is exactly as it happened here, but people have had days, and this is also basically how it feels to work in an emergency room over a period of time. That this is like the sort of like feeling that they're talking about of like, yeah, there was this really bad day, and they kind of, I feel like, acknowledge it at the end. Like there's a really great moment where Dr. Robbie goes to it's Dr. Javadi and is like, oh, this is your first day. And says like, it's gonna get easier from here, like, it's okay. There's a lot of that sentiment, even if this is sort of the most exaggerated version of the worst day you would ever have working in the ER. The sentiment that I'm hearing, I know, Trent, I think you were watching some of the Dr. Mike, not Dr. Mike from Survivor, but a different Dr. Mike, who has sort of reviewed some of the episodes of the show and talking about what it's like. But from what I've heard from healthcare providers, it isn't like this, but it is like this over a period of time. That over a period of working, years in the ER, this is the sentiment of what they are describing is what it feels like. You do literally never know what you're going to see that day, that sort of thing. So I sort of like give the show credit because it has to be a TV show. They do the trick of the 15-hour, the 15 hours, and I think for the most part, like we're all, I'm along. The show has bought enough goodwill that I'm like kind of along
Yes.
for the ride. Yeah.
Yeah. I think basically, and I definitely recommend. I discovered this YouTuber because of his reviews of the Pitt episodes. But Dr. Mike is very very fun on YouTube, and he has some great. I think he's done 3 of the episodes so far, and he needs to do much more. Dr. Mike, please. But basically, I think what I've seen, what I've heard is like all of these things 100% happen, from the assault of Dana to the things like the measles stuff and the abortion stuff, and like all of the things that you might think are like, oh, is this a little heavy-handed, is this a little bit like, no, people are like, no, this happens all the time. Would all of these things happen all on the same day? Probably not. But like in terms of like the events of this day, if you ask any given healthcare worker who's been on the job for 20 plus years, like, what is your worst day, like they'll probably have like that. I had a really really bad day one time, and this is the one time theoretically. We're gonna get to season 2, so who knows. But like, this is, if you in my head, it's like, this is the one day, that is like the worst day. And that tracks to me, and I think they also did personally like enough work with Santos to sort of justify that she would be very sensitive to somebody like Langdon, in order to like sort of see what was happening there, in the same way that she was with the patient that tried to take his own life later on in the day, and then also the father, which was still like, that one was weird. And then also brash enough to like really go out there and start telling people about it. And so it did. I agree that it did feel, again, that was where I was probably at my most worried for the show. Like, is this broaching into a territory that feels not quite on the level of realism? But I think they did manage to walk the line for myself.
Well, let's get into, as you said, the eventfulness of the day was certainly leading up to a big to do for the first day of a lot of our characters, but it goes to a completely whole new level, both for them and the show, when an alert goes out about a mass casualty event at Pitfest. And certainly there had been, to your earlier point, Grace, some eagle-eyed fans have been clocking, like, okay, maybe something's going to happen here. There's certainly been some very fair jokes about, like, okay, what type of festival has like a metalhead and a clown and these hippies all going to the same festival? I don't know. Pittsburgh is a wide mosaic of people. But like, the more I think about those 2 episodes, 12 and 13 in particular, like, sensational really comes to mind, both in the literal sense of that, like, my senses felt quite overwhelmed by it, and the fact that if you thought the first 11 hours were immersive, you do not breathe. You breathe alongside the staff when they get the chance to, with just how much we are moving between everything at all times. And I found it so brilliant, yet honestly so audacious. And to an earlier point that was mentioned, it basically came from the fact that usually these shifts are 12 hours, HBO wanted 15. And so they're like, well, we need some sort of excuse to keep them in for at least another 3 hours. And that's when the mass casualty event ended up coming to mind. And getting to, hear about the process of Joe and of Scott. I got the chance to talk with them. I'm sure they've given a lot of other interviews as well about like the mass amounts of research that they've done in this. So Joe Sachs is a writer on the show who he started on ER as like a medical consultant, and then has sort of parlayed it into this massive career as a writer in his own right. And he had done a little bit of like mass casualty events. He was, I think, at the epicenter of a San Francisco earthquake, I believe, back when he was on staff. But what it took to make this mass casualty episode happen was just a vast amount of research in talking with, sadly, all of these medical workers who know all too well what it is like to be in a mass shooting. Talk with people who had been in Vegas during that 2017 shooting at, speaking of Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life Synagogue, which ended up getting attacked as well. unfortunately, there was a bevy of people that he could reach out to. And in the process, what I found so massively intriguing is not only this idea of trying to make things true to life, right? The verisimilitude that the show has its cornerstone on, but from their perspective, being able to invent things that these medical professionals who they talked to wished they had. Those are the slap bracelets. The slap bracelets are completely new. They are a complete invention of the Pit, and it's because they had talked about like, oh, if you had done things differently, what do you wish you would have had? It's like, well, a way to code people based on the extremity of their injuries who don't have the ability to talk with us. Usually we write in Sharpie on people's foreheads and arms what's going on with them. It would have been nice to have some sort of placard that was waterproof and bloodproof to be able to write onto as well. And so what I think is so interesting, Grace, is this show obviously does not aim to be like, we want to inspire the medical community. Again, it's a quite literal fictionalized television show, but they allowed this as kind of an opportunity for them to create things that they hope, unfortunately, when not if these tragedies come around in the future, that there are ways you can triage these emergencies just born out of this random show that's on streaming.
That's wild to me. But I mean, yeah, the invention comes in all sorts of different forms, and the idea that the show, because they did so much research and talking with people, could actually implement like change of practice, change of care is pretty fascinating. That's really interesting. I think that's wild. These episodes are obviously a lot. It is. It's interesting to me that it's not just that they needed to extend it, but I think there also is, as much as this is like not the most fun change of pace, it is a change of pace in the way that the show works and functions, that oftentimes I do feel like it's funny, it's not that they've gone away. Like there have been several shows over the last few years that have done sort of like taking the camera and sort of pivoting it and being like, we're going to be over here for a whole episode. But there is sort of a way in which with the reductions, we don't get quite as many of them. And this, it's been a while, I feel like, since we've had like not just like this type of like, oh, this is the moment, this is the thing, where you can kind of like parlance about it and people know exactly what you're talking about when you watch the show. But then it was like a like multiple episodes as well, something that shifted so dramatically that I think is like I think it was really effective way to sort of like lengthen out the course of the season, Taran.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I heard a lot about this portion of the show was like the idea of the show being like competency porn, which is like, you just really like watching people who are good at what they do be good at what they do. And I think there's a lot to that, and I think it is very fun. I think the whole show in general tends to lean in that direction, even when they are making mistakes or disagreeing about things.
Having it be a training hospital, I thought, was an effective choice.
Yeah, like it was such a great way to just shoehorn in exposition, right? Of like,
Oh, yeah.
okay, and this is why we do this. It was a perfect way to thread that needle.
For me, I think what was most effective about the Pitfest episodes was not just how competent they were, but how much it sort of like banded them together. Like this isn't a show again about melodrama or personal lives interfering a ton or whatever, but they did still have like different conflicts and disagreements, and all of that fell away in face of this greater threat. And that to me is so compelling to see all of these different characters just drop everything and focus so intently on being part of this, like being the cog in this greater design, to try to help make this thing function, to try to do the best that they could. And obviously that's something that like any, I think, piece of media could do, on an individual level, but to have built these pieces up for 10 12 episodes beforehand, and then to see them get slotted into these places where they need to work in a certain way, I think was just a really compelling way of seeing that and of being able to empathize with them, and seeing them work and be so competent, and then also now afterwards seeing the cost of it, and in how, how much that impacts them, I think was really fascinating.
Yeah, I think that it was, and to that earlier point, if this was a typical 8 episode, not even streaming, series, but almost like the length of sometimes some weekly shows that we get, where it's like 6 to 8 episodes, and then you're going to leave for 18 months and then come back, it would not have felt as deserved of a break in format. It really did feel like they did such a great job of kind of setting up what to know about the pit and how to feel about the pit and how it usually runs. And then for them to turn it completely on its head, again, still in its first season, was incredibly admirable and again, audacious, but I think something that worked so entirely well because it did feel like the groundwork had been laid out. That to your point, Taryn, there have been so many other random personal drama factors that have been brought in that kind of all get dropped in that moment. We might get a little bit of like Santos Langdon drama in episode 13, but really like outside of that, everyone kind of drops all the BS they have going on in honor of this greater good, which is to treat these patients with, maybe one exception here. We mentioned it before, but Grace, talk to me about, we all knew it would be an inevitable breaking point for Dr. Robbie. You mentioned the flashbacks that we had to his mentor's death, of which it was the anniversary today. And I would say, this was 120 straws that break the camel's back here, as we do lose a named character. Granted, it was, not Jake, maybe someone that people thought would be the one to die in the shooting, but someone close to him, obviously, and it drives him over the edge, albeit temporarily.
Yeah, this storyline, for as I, as much as you talk about like there's not melodrama, there is a lot of like interrelationship stuff that happens that like again, I think that this show bought so much goodwill and it's done with such a gentle touch that it is in there. There is this relationship stuff, but it feels born out of like the work that they're doing and they're like it feels like coworker dynamics often more so than it and the type of co-working where like you're really in it rather than maybe like other professions. But yeah, this the Leah dying stuff with Jake is there's been a few shows every once in a while. Like I feel like I have such an like I'm an overthinker. So I'm like as I'm watching stuff, I'm like, oh, is this working? Is this good? What are they trying to do? Rather than just being in it a lot of times. And when I really just get like pulled into it, and specifically this is the another example of the way I'm going to talk about how the show kind of left something in a way that feels potentially unsatisfying, but I give the show credit for sort of being willing to do it and doing it well enough that it doesn't feel unsatisfying, which is the way that Jake and Robbie's relationship, the note that it ends on, which is that Jake yells at him basically and says like, you're not my father and I don't want to talk to you. And Robbie's trying to in that moment trying to say like, hey, if you don't forgive me, that's okay. And Jake says, yeah, I don't. You're not my dad. Please leave. And that's basically where we leave things off. And it's really heartbreaking. Like, cause like a thing that I think the show did so well, I keep going back to it, is the premiere episode. The pilot is done so exceptionally well, where you basically follow Dr. Robbie throughout that day, and everybody you meet, you get to see how they sort of, are related to Dr. Robbie and what their interactions with. And I think like does a really good job to them when they're kind of like on their own. They've established these characters so well. But really, I think the person I'm like, other than all of our, we all love Dr. King, but Robbie is like he's the person, he's the face on the poster, and so for him to have this moment and have to figure out what to do next, I thought was like incredibly powerful. But I think the thing that I feel the most about is that, like, I want to watch more of the Pit to see what his relationship with Jake is like. I want to see that's the thing that I'm like, I like they gave me 15 episodes and I feel like, but I want more of this immediately as soon as possible. And and it's the way that interaction gets left is realistic, that Jake would not be over the death of this girl that he brought to Pitfest by the end of the thing that happened 3 hours ago, like at
Yeah.
most. So that's the way it ends. And for me, I just want to get back in that world and see what their relationship is like, Taryn.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of sort of hanging threads that, season 2 has been said it will be about like 10 months later, on 4th of July weekend. And I think it was also, I think Noah also said that like all of your favorite characters will be back. Like, don't worry about like
Yeah, well,
who's
we'll
going to
talk
be
about
back.
that later. Like, Langdon's going to be back, Dana's going to be back, Scott Gemmell and John Wells have pretty much confirmed it. That's another reason for the time jump as well. Is like otherwise, Langdon, practically speaking, would have to spend a significant time away. Dana would probably not come back the next day, but she might have a change of heart, 10 months later.
Yeah, and I think a time jump makes sense regardless. I think
Yeah,
that just
100%.
like I think that you can only fit so much in at one point to then where it wouldn't be believable. Like if we go, it's the next day, and we're still dealing with a lot of the same stuff. Like, well, that is too repetitive, so we need to get new stuff. But new stuff is just like now we're really starting to push the bounds of believability. And so to give them some space to have like react to what happened and change perhaps because of it, and then spend the first few hours of this shift sort of like showing us the different ways that season 1 impacted them, and the ways that they've changed and updating their lives. I'm sure we'll eventually find out like what Dr. Robbie's relationship is now with his stepson, whatever it was,
Yep.
relationship. And I'm sure we'll get an update on like McKay and her situation with her ex, and is Javati gonna be dating the hot nurse, or is she gonna still be like or is she even gonna be there at all? Because she's somebody that I could see like not being there, because she was kind of like, I don't know about this.
You can see the moment, right, where it's like they call like someone doesn't work in the ER, right? It's like, but then like they call them down for surgery, and it's like that person is like, oh yeah, you don't work here anymore, but you still work. You're in the
Mhm.
hospital or whatever. Like,
Right,
yeah,
well, yeah, because
yeah,
remember, like, as Whitaker is gonna talk about, which is the next thing I
right,
wanna get into, like, as part of being an intern, like, you shadow
Yeah.
a bunch of different stuff. This is very apples and oranges, but, like,
right,
the dream team on Survivor does a very similar thing where, like, they're working on challenges, they're, in on production stuff as well, and so you're meant to explore a bunch of stuff. This just happened to be, like, Javati's rotation in emergency
right,
medicine, so she might go into internal or something else next season.
right.
Mhm. Yeah, and then also like what is the Santos Whitaker relationship now,
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
10 months of living together?
Yeah, I want to talk about that because I do think that for a lot of very valid points you're both making about how a lot of things are purposely and also again I think very realistically left open ended. That I don't think at the end of just a regular day, as irregular as this might be like, well, I think we've now officially given a statement on our relationship that 10 months later we could open something back up. This is maybe the lone exception, and this is another great example of again a twist that I did not see coming. We've had moments where Whitaker was pocketing a bunch of different
Mhm,
sandwiches, or for example, like when he's helping the Kraken, there is something mentioned about the street team where
mhm,
people go out and help the unhoused, and Whitaker shows a lot of interest in that. I had just made it as some sort of because he had been built up as the comic relief who kept getting fluids on his clothes. This idea of like, well, he just is kind of like this poor medical student from a financial situation, and also from I guess a fate perspective that he has to pocket all these sandwiches because he's not making much money. I did not think it was to the extent of, oh, he lives in the empty wing of the hospital because he has nowhere else to go. And I also think it was a good way that, to your point, Taran, I would say one of the more unsavory characters in Santos has a couple of sweet moments here towards the end between her connecting with this guy who had tried to commit suicide, and then also with Whitaker, where she's like, yeah, I've been razzing you all day, but like, yes, I only met you 15 hours ago, but like, I'm gonna lend you a helping hand here because I could tell that you are not in a very good place right now.
I love Whitaker so much. I think
He's
they
so
they
good.
nailed his character so well. The way that he will just like not pick up on things sometimes, but in such a, I think, a realistic way. I mean, obviously the Krav Maga line is very funny, and but like I think most of the time when it happens, it's like, hey, this isn't the woman Chu, and he's like, nope, it's not. Yeah, can you find her? Like, oh yeah. And then of course the famous like when he drills into the patient's arm
Yeah,
Oh
like
my
without them being
the eye out,
unconscious.
just be like, all right, clown, here you go.
It's just like a very, I think, like probably the most realistic intern there. And at least from my perspective, not knowing any medical interns, but like he never came up with like magical like solutions that he saw on YouTube or whatever. He just like made very believable mistakes because he's somebody who is just like there and trying his best, but like just can't take it all in all the time. And so I thought that worked so well. And the way that his backstory was woven in very, very subtly throughout was good, only to like end in this climax of Santos discovering him as he is like singing. It was so funny.
It's also a very there's a way it's like when we find him and we find that he's like is unhoused. He's like dancing and singing, you know, and it is this like thing. And there's this like there is a piece of me that's like, oh, should I go back and rewatch it? Because I do think there is a lot. There's obviously all the stuff you talked about that's seeded in, but Mike, you're right. Like it does feel like it's so he's gonna sign up for the night crew team, like the street team.
Yeah, there's also a certain point where like they talk about like what's the empty wing of the hospital, and he seems to know a lot about it, despite the fact that he is an intern.
Right. There is there's the stuff with the couple, like the husband who's
Oh yeah, who
like
got like severely burned.
yes, and he makes this connection with her and she's inviting him over like for dinner basically, and like all of this stuff. Like I actually give the show a lot of credit again for like not telling us really early on that he like is unhoused. Like they really do leave it right till that last episode in a way that it sort of reframes everything that happened before in a way that I think just adds a lot of depth to it. So again, I think the show is really good. I don't know that we've been saying that enough probably, but it's really well done.
I will, as we segue into talking about like what's to come with season 2, I do want to get into like probably number one on my call sheet of what I need to see. I need Dr. King and Dr. Mohan to like be friends. I need them to get super duper close, because when I was talking with Taylor Dearden, like she said how as much as we communally love Mel, she feels so incredibly alone there. I think it's because, you know, Taylor Dearden has been so upfront about how she brought her own neurodivergency into the character, that she had essentially like kind of sat down initially when the character was pitched to her, and she's like, so she's on the spectrum, right? And they're like, yes, we were thinking about that initially, but we didn't necessarily want to do that because then we'd have to bring in an actor who's on the spectrum. And she's like, I've got good news for you, because ADHD and autism are sort of have been recently discovered to be on the same spectrum here. But she talks about how as much as we love her and how much she absolutely lives for this, there is a certain isolationist and loneliness to her, considering the fact that she does feel still so incredibly different from everybody. You know, she's also kind of in this weird territory where she is one of the people who this is her first day, but she's a second year resident. So like she's not even in the same bucket as the other interns. And I just feel like her and Mohan unfortunately kind of have the same problem, right? And we see this in this breakdown moment she has where she's like, what, you think that just because I don't have a social life and I focus predominantly on my job, you don't think that I'm mentally balanced? I'm totally fine. I'm copacetic, baby, only for her to obviously show that she's not. So again, Taran, I would never want to put myself in the shoes of these writers or write on their behalf. But I feel like that is a hookup, even just from like a pure friendship perspective, that needs to happen, considering how much they could be there for each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably the biggest thing left hanging, the biggest thing that they didn't show in the season was Mel finding out about Langdon, because he was the one person that she connected to, and it was very adorable when she was like, "Oh, you're back!" Like she was like very happy to see him, because like they had really connected, and so you know, obviously it was a hard day for her, but you know, her reaction to finding out about Langdon, I think, is huge, and obviously we're not going to get it because
Yeah.
we're going to be 10 months later. But I have to imagine it deeply informs her character 10 months later. You know, I talked about like Mel not really having as many flaws in the same ways that other characters do because she's just so good. But I have to imagine that part of this isolation is going to come from the fact that you know, maybe the sense of betrayal from Langdon, maybe maybe with Langdon there, like what is their relationship going to be like? I think there's all kinds of different things that you can do with her character. And I agree. I think Mohan is probably the next closest, person to like, just like she's really good at a lot of what she makes. A couple mistakes. She's like too slow, I guess. But
Slow-mo,
like
yeah.
she's otherwise very good, and comes up with a lot of really good ideas, and is very, very good with patience. And so I do think they would get along really well.
The scene with Mel and her sister at the very end in the last episode is so friggin' cute. It's so good. Of like, we can get pizza and is it pasta? No, what are they?
And spaghetti, yeah.
Spaghetti.
They said they're
Spaghetti.
gonna get
Oh,
pizza and then order spaghetti to have
and
the
they're gonna
next
watch
day.
Elf. She's like, maybe a movie we haven't seen before. It's like, but Elf is very good. I was like, yeah, Elf is very good. It's so cute. I have one qualm, and it's about nothing to do with the show. I would like the two of you just right now to go and Wikipedia Taylor Durden, because I did not know that she is the daughter of Bryan Cranston. This was
Yes,
informed to me
so
the other day. I didn't know until the end of the show. If just very quickly, Mike, if you Google Taylor Durden and look at her Wikipedia photo, let's get a better Wikipedia photo than the one that is
yeah,
currently on her Wikipedia. That's a campaign I'm starting right now. Justice for Taylor.
it's
Okay?
very tough. It's of her on clearly a
She's like
panel for
eye
something, and
rolling
she's like
or
mid. But though, what's interesting though, and in talking with Taylor about this, is like that is actually kind of a snapshot of the characters that she is more so well known for coming
right,
into the Pit. Like if you ever saw
right,
Sweet Vicious, which was a show about sexual assault that was on MTV, she played this like very punky black sheep character. Of course, American Vandal. She plays a snarky character there as well. So she actually
right.
had a lot of difficulty initially with like the character description called for peppy. I can't do peppy. I don't know what peppy is, and Taran's showing the picture right now.
Oh,
It
come
ain't a good
on,
look.
Justice. Come on.
But yeah, it's so interesting considering that like you have the entire Javadi storyline as to like how do you when you work in the same industry and same facility as your parent who's more well known, how do you
Yeah,
like cement your own name? And you have not only Taylor Dearden, who is Bryan Cranston's daughter, you have Dr. McKay, played by Fiona Dourif, the
all right.
daughter of Brad Dourif, who also played a medical professional on an HBO drama in Deadwood.
That's fun.
Yeah.
It's very fun. We haven't really talked much about McKay. I liked McKay a lot.
Yeah, what
As
did you
well.
think about the how that whole storyline with David ended? That like it was okay, it was sort of personified at least from Robbie's perspective as like you made this mess, you called the cops on David, you blew up this entire situation when it didn't need to be. It's your mess, you clean it up. And like again, similar to what we've been talking about, this felt like it came to a soft ending, I would say, and that it wasn't like David being like, "You're right, Dr. McKay. Thank you so much. I'm going to go get help for my clearly troubled mind." But McKay sort of just like gives him the hard facts of like, listen, I know where you are right now. You feel like you're troubled. You feel like there's no way out, but just know like attacking women is not the way to do this.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Turn.
I couldn't help but see the connections to adolescence.
That's exactly what I was going to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
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 I'll let you
Down
take it
to
from
the
there.
No,
the
you
Because,
got
interesting
yeah.
it.
down to the camera work that the Pit pulls off as well. Maybe not nearly the feat that Adolescence does, but
Hmm.
It's
Right.
just yeah, it's just I mean, it is so challenging. I think that this time, I mean, this show just hits on like we could spend like 10 more hours being and each hour could be on one thing that the show like kind of like someone comes to the hospital, you're like, oh, it's about this thing.
that would be a great podcast if we podcast for 15 hours in a row and
That's right.
each hour we focus on a different thing on the Pit.
That's right. I will say at some point I did go to the ER in the last few weeks, so I will tell you about my experience of going to the ER.
Ooh.
I had to go to the emergency room. Um,
Were you a
but
Doug Driscoll type?
well, I asked him. I said, yeah, I did punch a lot of.
Did you ask for a Dr. Robbie?
I was like, Dr. Rob. I was like, I'm here for the Pit immersive experience.
Yeah.
So this storyline though is about sort of this type of young man, who is there is this feeling amongst people who we might refer to as incels or whatever, but this idea that they are losing something in the current, they're missing out, or something is being withheld from this
Mm.
generation of young men. And it is, I think, tricky to try to like both affirm the feelings that people are having and also try to point out where they are they're making choices in their behavior that is obviously wrong, and trying to do both of those things of being supportive and firm, at the same time. And I think that this show, again, like based on the constraints of this is the only time we're not going to get flashback or a flash forward, like we just have to kind of leave it there. And ultimately that is a reality as well, that there is a way in which that when when boys are showing this sort of behavior, young men are showing this behavior, there is some level of like hoping that you get through to them and they can sort of start to understand, and also that you have to sort of trust that they won't do something. And I think both Robbie and Dr. McKay are sort of both struggling. Like Robbie obviously to some degree thinks that like it was an over correction of like, and actually that by doing that you're actually triggering the thing potentially that you are the most scared of, and actually there's a way in which like you're kind of like messing with his life in a way that might actually throw him more so that is I thought that there's one moment in the show, and I can't remember what it is, but I feel like there's something really well done about police as well, of like is it an addiction issue? I can't remember. I feel like, or maybe I watch so much TV that I'm misremembering something, but the way in which like policing gets complicated when it comes to like vulnerable people as well, and the way that like our justice systems work and or often don't work, and actually sort of can create complicated situations. So I actually don't mind the ending. It's probably one of the stories in particular that I was like the most I was sort of the least sort of like super invested in, because but McKay also has a story of like obviously the situation with her ex-husband and the ankle monitor and all of that stuff that's happening that we again don't really like. I feel like McKay probably is, if you look at the character who probably got like the least sort of like, she does have this moment where they acknowledge that she just has to go get the ankle monitor fixed in the morning, but we got no follow-up to anything. We get one conversation, she's talking to her
Yeah,
son right on the way home.
I will
Yeah.
say, if there's my one qualm with the finale was kind of the nothing burger cliffhanger of like, oh my god, she's being arrested. Oh, never mind, it's fine. You're
Yeah.
gonna let her go.
It's very Amazing Race coded, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh no, we're in trouble. Commercial break. Come back. No, it's fine. Don't worry about it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So, oh, go ahead, Taran.
No, I agree. I think that I really liked Dr. McKay overall. I think that like I think we talked about this on the Tastemakers, but in particular, the fact that she, I think, is seen to be a very strong moral presence in the show, while also, you know, we question some of her decisions. And I think like when she's confronted by Dr. Collins about like the bias that she might have,
Oh yeah.
and the way that she responds to that, I thought that was a
Intriguing.
really important moment on the show.
That's weight bias,
Um,
right? That's that one, right?
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so I really appreciate her presence because she's, I think, the perfect example of like a flawed character, of like somebody who is like not a, just like perfectly heroic, always championing for the right social justice cause, whatever person, but is doing her best and fighting as hard as she can to help the people that she can.
And
And yeah.
and her background is fairly unique as well. They don't get into it too much, maybe towards the beginning, but like she's a second year resident, like she is in the same tier as Mel, but with no offense to Fiona Durf, she's significantly older. And she talks about that as well. And I think this idea that like she is trying to incorporate a bit of her like street smarts and experience into the very book smarts environment of medicine, I think is incredibly interesting. We talk about these moments like, the sex trafficking case with that woman and her boss, where she's like, I know this thing because I've seen it before, so I'm going to really push this issue. Again, the reason why, at least what Fiona Dorff told me, is like the reason why she pushed so hard on David is because she saw herself in him and saw that, like, basically it's implied that, like, when McKay was younger, she was falling into some really bad things. She was falling into some very bad vices and activities that got her in trouble, and she wouldn't want that to happen to another person when she saw it. So I'm intrigued to see how that all gets followed up on. And let's talk about this follow up because, there's this landscape of TV, not a lot is guaranteed, but a lot has been guaranteed so far in the few days that the Pit has finalized here. We know there's a season 2. We know it is coming January, 8 months from now. We're not entirely sure what the day is, but we know it is coming January 2026. We do have a timeline, to Taran's point, 10 months later, 4th of July weekend. over under 2 fireworks accidents. We shall see. We know that, again, from what Gemmel and Wells have been talking about in interviews, it does seem like we're not going to get any, like, nobody's being written off the show, I don't think, in terms of our main cast. These characters might come back in different roles. As an example, like Whitaker will now actually get paid for the work that he is doing in the time since. So they might have different behaviors and different roles that they occupy, but they are still going to be back. Taran, what are your thoughts about the fact that we're going to get it back so soon, and anticipation for what's to come in season 2 based on what we saw in season 1?
I mean, I love it. I mean, I didn't want the season to end in the first place, and so the fact that it's coming back so soon is such a relief. Like it's so it has reminded me of what we've lost. Like obviously, it's something we complain about a lot. I think in general as TV viewers is how long it takes to get new seasons of a show, and then especially when they are then only like 6 to 8 episodes. It's like,
Yeah.
man. And then especially then if they are just dropped all at once, then it's like, well, once every few years I'll have a few days of this show in my life. Like there's a space for that for sure, but the idea that in another like 8 or so, like 9 months from now, I'm gonna have another potentially 15 weeks of the Pit, is just so refreshing, so relieving, and it's not gonna leave my system. I'm not gonna be like, oh yeah, I remember the Pit, that'll be fun. It's just gonna be like we're back, and yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Grace, what about you?
Yeah, I'm very excited. And this day, like, I think that there's sort of the inevitable thing of like, oh yeah, that seems like it would be a busy day at the hospital. But there's a member of the former Post Recaps Discord, Alex B, who is, I believe he's a doctor. I think I've got that right. Alex B
He
says
just plays one on Discord.
he does play one on this. Yeah, Dr. Alex B. He says July 4th is one of the worst shifts of the year, FYI. It's very busy between everyone drinking, things exploding, grilling, drinking, he says again. On top of that, the medical center isn't January to December, it's July to June. So July 4th, you'll get a lot of brand new doctors who need extra supervision on a very busy day.
Oh,
so
that's interesting. That could see a possibility of even more cast members now.
He also did sort of outline, which I think is interesting. I think that otherwise I probably wouldn't really do this, other than the fact that I think that the show is so detail oriented. That's something Alex has said as well, that the show is so detail, but he sort of like goes through in terms of like who, depending on what their like what year they were in or what level of like getting their becoming a doctor they are, like whether or not they would be on it. And he sort of goes through, which is I think is like really interesting, that like Langdon probably will be held back a year because of everything that happened, as opposed to Collins, who probably, as long as she if she chooses to take a job at the Pit, which like you assume she will, then she's going to be on the same level as Dr. Robbie. So you get like there's all these ways in which like the timing of going to that date is not just that. I think it makes complete sense from the way in which, again, you're not doing the next day. I absolutely would not want to see that. You're picking another day. You're picking this day that sort of like is arguably one of the worst days to work in the ER because of the amount of incidents. And it's also this thing in which like the power dynamics of people choosing to be in what job, like, and whether they're or not they're back. Like a lot of people think that Whitaker, this is what Alex thinks, is that Whitaker will probably become an intern, and most people think he would choose to go into the emergency. Sorry, he's currently a 4th year, and he would go into emergency medicine and match at the Pit. So that will be like, that. So there's all these ways in which like July 4th is
like,
not
yeah, my stuff's there. I gotta go back.
He's like, I can only take a job where there is. I guess he does have now a room. So, but I just thought that was really interesting and something.
Well, no, but also he only like I think Santos has a car, so he's like, well, my roommate's doing it, so I guess I have to come along. I can't get a ride back.
I think to your joke about how many fireworks incidents we get, I think we should probably later, not now, closer to the season, we should come on and do a like injury draft. We normally do a death draft, but we're gonna do basically like who will be saved draft, which is like grill to the foot, like fireworks exploding, like a boat incident, probably.
Yeah,
right?
like a Family Feud top 10 most likely 4th of July related injuries. But again, like you talked about with the post Pitfest injuries, like there might just be also random stuff of like, hey, yeah, I just so happened to break my leg, but it had nothing to do with the 4th of July, but I have to go in on the 4th of July.
The one thing I would also like, just in terms of like where people were at, I think Javati is a perfect person to be in that role of like, she's not around and then suddenly realize like she's done something else in medicine. And like, I think that's actually a really good point, that like, as much as the show is trying to tell us like with Dr. Robbie, like it's okay to take a break. I also think it would be very good for them to say like, if it's also not the right fit for you, like not all of these people need to be like, the people who work in the emergency room. Like she did it. She did this day. She got through it. Doesn't mean it has to be the thing she wants to do. And actually, I love that there's the doctor who makes all the puns and the jokes, like all these other people who would often like, this show was just really good.
Dr.
Like,
Shen, I think his name is, one of the night shift guys.
this show is just like so good at like someone showing up and you feel like they're a pretty fully functioned, like character. I think there's at the end there where like you have the two night doctors who are like on shift, but and they're like joking about how Abbott and Robbie took their patient, but then you have the like this other person come in and be like, these are the people you got working. Like and actually that is a great example again of the way in which the show does have people make the night doctor, I can't remember what her name is, who
Dr.
gives
Ellis.
too much. She gives too much of the blood transfusion and didn't realize that is actually a mistake that you made. And the way that she sort of ends up, this show is just, I can't stop saying it, but the show is very good.
It is so good. And we could go on basically for the next, 8 months about how good it is. But alas, much like these doctors need to get to bed, we will put this podcast to bed as well. But regardless, I'm looking for an excuse to rewatch the show. I'm hopeful that if and when it gets some awards attention, it'll be an opportunity to do so, or at least engage in discourse about how unique this show is in both, in the way it carries out its themes that are simultaneously both sort of like of the present, but also of the past as well. It's incredibly strong group of characters. And the fact that, to your point, Taran, it seems like HBO is intending, or Warner Brothers by proxy is intending to do this every year, which is a rarity in television and is incredibly welcome. That said, while the Pit is taking a much needed rest, we are all doing a lot of talking about other stuff here on WeKnowScriptedTV.com. Let's go around the horn and do some plugs here. Taran, what would you like people to check out?
Well, you can always find me on YouTube and Twitch, streaming, watching shows, talking about all kinds of things. Grace and I do the Tastemakers podcast, where if you were a listener of the Tastemaker podcast, we talked about the Pit before it even came out, saying that we were flagging it as something that we were excited about. Sure. So you would have been on top of that pretty quickly, amongst other shows and movies that we give our thoughts on. So check that out. And of course, all three of us in varying degrees will be talking about The Last of Us very soon. So that's very exciting.
All right, Grace, anything you'd like to plug?
Writing a bit on Parade. You can check that out. I would also like to ask folks that if I was to dive into another medical drama, which one should I do? That's going to be my question. I'm going to leave to people. You can leave it in the
ER.
Yeah, I know it's probably BR,
but I think like the good thing about it, to Taran's point, is like you could probably have people pick and choose episodes for you to watch, or like seasons for you to watch. And listen, if you want more brooding Noah Wyle, you got a lot of them in that.
I think.
Yes,
here's my recommendation for ER is that, like, I think probably the best way to watch ER is the first 8 seasons, and then either the last full season or like the last few episodes of season like 15. Or you could watch the whole thing if you want. Or you could there's probably like a viewing guide, because it's like 22 to 24 episodes a season, so that is definitely a lot.
I'm sure in this modern day media landscape, there has to be at least a few articles out there of like, if you like Noah Wyle, watch these 20 episodes of ER.
That's right.
But there's definitely, like, I think for the first 8 seasons, I think like you are solid. Like there's not many misses there.
I'm gonna be interested in people. Like I did a lot of House. I did like the first. I don't think I finished House, but I watched a big chunk of it. But I'm sure there's got to be like some hidden gems out there. Taran and I will tell you, it's probably not Pulse on Netflix right now. But yeah,
don't watch Pulse.
Yeah.
And so as Taran alluded to before, you can hear all three of our voices actually talking about some very similar shows. Of course, The Last of Us coming out tomorrow, a show that is as gnarly as The Pit in terms of maybe some of the body stuff that happens, but in very different ways. But very much recommend that show. Grace and I are doing night of episodic recaps. Grace and Taran are doing a video game club where they're comparing what happened on the show to its video game counterpart. And then all three of us are going to be in your ears on Tuesdays, recapping the final season of Andor, another very highly acclaimed Star Wars show, kind of sort of like at the Pit, a way of taking a previously existing genre and structure and adapting it for a modern audience that just completely defies all expectations. So be sure to check all of that out, as well as all the other great stuff we have going on here on We Know Scripted TV. That being said, let us know your thoughts about the Pit in the comments on this video or reaching out to us on social media. Let us know your thoughts about the show, your thoughts on various characters, who you like, who you don't like. I will once again do a little bit of shameless plugging and say that I got the chance to talk with a fair amount of people on this show. Noah Wiley, I talked several times with Scott Gemmell and John Wells and Joe Sachs and Fiona Dourif, and very recently Taylor Dearden, which was just an absolute delight. Just so incredibly open about everything that she brought to this character, as they all did. So you can check that out over at parade.com, as well as all the other random musings I have with the people that are so generous to sit down with me and talk about making some of the best content on Earth. And I hope this podcast at least matched up to some of that quality. We're about to clock out of our shift here talking about the Pit, but really looking forward to hearing what you all have to say, as well as what comes next with this series. Hopefully some awards gold in the future. And regardless, we'll be back in January getting to see what happens on one very eventful 4th of July weekend. Thank you all so much for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.